Hi, Year 10. So you're going to be researching and completing the question below for your starter activity. It is essential that an oven is preheated before cooking foods in it. Give 3 reasons why a preheated oven is important. If you're unsure about preheated, I would research what preheating is and use the sentence starter. Preheating an oven before cooking is essential because, and then use that as your answer. So getting into the practice of writing full sentences within food and nutrition. For the challenge, what are the differences of sensory outcomes for oven-baked chips if one batch was cooked in a preheated oven and the other was cooked in an oven that was still heating up? So sensory outcomes being taste, texture, appearance, and so on. And what would happen if you had just put oven baked, so if you put like chips into a preheated oven, what would be that sensory outcome, those tastes and textures and so on? And if you were to put the same batch of chips into an oven that was still heating up, you would just turn it on, you'd put them into the oven, what would happen? What would be the sensory outcomes and the disadvantages and the advantages of that process as well? Spend 10 minutes on this task. Today's lesson, we're looking at heat transfers. You can see the career links up there being food taster and chef, and the duration for this lesson will be 100 minutes. Today's learning objectives. All students will define and recognize how heat is transferred to foods in order to cook them. For most students, we'll be able to interpret within their writing how heat is transferred to foods during cooking. And some students will understand how to use a range of heat transfers in order to attain required sensory outcomes during cooking. There are the keywords down there: conduction, convection, radiation, chemical reactions, and vibration. There are many others within this lesson, so if you come across them and you're unsure, write them down as your keywords as we go. Pause the video here, and how would you describe the different textures of these foods and how have each of these foods been cooked? So spend 5 minutes, pause the video here. How would you describe the textures of these foods and how have each of these foods been cooked? We can tell by the cake, it's nice and fluffy, colourful green beans, juicy steak, tender carrots, stodgy rice, crisp chips, and smooth soup. If you were to describe how or look up how each of these have been cooked, cakes, baking. For green beans, you could steam, you could boil, you can blanch. With steak, you can fry, grill. For the carrots, you can a number of ways. You can roast them, you can boil them, blanch them, and so on. With rice, you can cook, you can steam, you can simmer, boil. For the chips, you could roast, you could even blanch them beforehand with your triple cooked chips. And for the soup, you would be sauteing, you'd be frying, then you'd be bringing it to a boil, then simmering. So all these different outcomes of all these lovely foods that you would get, and they all go through these cooking processes and heat transfers, which we're going to look at now. So why is food cooked? It is cooked for a variety of reasons. We have high-risk foods, remembering those high-risk foods of meat, fish, eggs, even gravy is classed as a high-risk food due to those meat proteins. And high-risk foods must be cooked properly to destroy food poisoning bacteria, those pathogens that they're likely to contain, because it's not like you're going to be liable to be eating a raw piece of food like that. You need to cook it to get rid of those bacteria to make sure all those pathogens are being killed off so that you're not going to get food poisoning. Some foods contain natural toxins and poisons that would be harmful if the food was eaten raw. They're in minuscule amounts, and I did get this one from a social media site which says that all these fruits contain natural chemicals that are poisonous but they're in minuscule amounts. The cyanide in the apples, that is mainly coming from the pips and the seeds that are within the apples. But in hindsight, cooking destroys these toxins and makes food safe to eat. How are different sensory outcomes produced in food? So when cooking is developing flavor, this is caused by chemical reactions that take place within the food. So for example, you take cake. All the ingredients in cake are going through a chemical reaction. They each have their own processes that they're going through in order to create this fluffy, tender cake by the end. So take, for example, this raw cake mix. The cake mix is cooked in the oven, and then the ingredients within the cake have all played a part in creating the desired outcome. So for example, the fat, the butter, or the margarine that's been used, it's melted. The protein in the egg coagulates, so it's holding the structure of the flours and everything else that's with all the other ingredients that's within the cake. The sugar caramelizes, so it changes color, also helps to give structure and helps to preserve the cake. And the starch gelatinizes, so starch within the flour gelatinizes within the cake. So all these chemical processes are happening within the cake to get the desired outcome. Cooking also improves the texture of food in order to make it easier to eat, swallow, and digest. For example, cooking starchy foods such as rice causes the starch granules within the rice to swell, gelatinize, and to thicken and soften a food. So you take rice, raw rice there, and then you cook it. It's absorbed the water. It's absorbed the water through boiling or steaming, and has gelatinized the food. Therefore, it's easier for us to digest it and eat. Cooking also develops a crisp or soft texture of the outside of some foods. You take, for example, potatoes, and potatoes, for example, making chips. So from that process, with triple cooked chips, for example, you would boil them to make them nice and soft, and then you would put them into either hot fat, so you could either deep fat fry them, or you could put them into a nice hot oven, and therefore it would be nice and soft in the middle and crunchy on the outside. To people, that is the perfect chip. And for example, carrots, or raw carrots, you could also put them through a roasting process, or a blanching process, or a boiling process. Like, there are so many different ways that you can get like nice development of textures and tastes just by the way that you're cooking foods. So what cooking methods do you think were used to help to create the outcomes of some of these foods? I think I've given some of them away. Cooking destroys harmful microorganisms. Remember these microorganisms such as bacteria, molds, which helps preserve the food, making it last longer, basically making it last longer. So for example, UHT milk, canned foods, ready meals and jams and chutneys, and using heat processes. For example, UHT is heated to 132 degrees to kill bacteria. So where you would have fresh milk, which is usually pasteurized, you got like about 2 days to a week to drink that, but UHT can last for months, just because of the process it's gone through to kill off that bacteria. Same with beans. They've already been cooked within the can, so they can be eaten from the can should you so wish. And also with sterilizing jars, cooking foods beforehand help to preserve and store food for longer with jams and chutneys, hence why they're able to be stored at an ambient temperature, room temperature of 21 degrees for months. Pause the presentation here and spend 10 minutes on this task. Question: define what cooking methods are. So research using online sources, newspapers, books, whatever you have to hand, and define what cooking methods are. And with the challenge, can you give an advantage of dry frying? So looking up dry frying, and what's the advantage of dry frying when it comes to a healthy, balanced diet. So pause the presentation here and spend 10 minutes on the task. Write the following for the revision notes. So either use your line paper or the books if you have them. Title being heat transfers. Now, food is cooked using heat energy. So transferring heat energy means moving it from one place to another. There are three methods of heat transfer. You might have already found them or looked them up or been learning about them in science. They are conduction, convection, and radiation. So pause here, write the following for revision notes. Again, writing the following for revision notes. Heat transfers is very important when it comes to foods, as it's basically describing and showing how food is actually cooked. So when it comes to conduction, this is a heat transfer due to the vibration of particles within the pan, for example, that it's being cooked in. So when the pan is being heated, the particles within the pan vibrate and they gain heat. So they're colliding with the other particles nearby and they're passing on their heat. So when food is placed in a pan, the heat then transfers to the food and then cooks it. So preheating a pan, which we've done in class before, it allows just for that quick cooking. So for example, stir fry, you have that little bit of oil in there, you heat up the pan using conduction and you add the vegetables and whatever else you're adding to your stir fry. It's quick, it's easy, it's fast, and it also helps to retain vitamins and minerals. Again, writing the following for revision notes. Convection is the heat transfer through gases and or liquids. So when heating a liquid, you can see with the kettle there, near the heat source, which is at the bottom. So the warmer the water gets, for example, with that kettle, it's heating up the bottom via conduction, and then the heat is going up and pushing the cold surrounding liquid down, and this creates a convection current. So it's in this circular motion that you can see there with a convection current. And at the top there, you have convection ovens. So that's a fan oven, which is using convection to heat up the oven with the hot air being blown around, so going from up to, and then pushing the colder air down, and therefore you then get this convection current, which helps to heat up the oven. Radiation is the heat transfer through heat waves. There is no direct contact when it comes to the food and this heat transfer. So for example, you can use toasters, grills, microwaves and barbecues. That is a source of radiation. So radiation waves are emitted and they reach the food, and then the food is absorbing that heat. So there's no direct contact. It's not like conduction where it's you're cooking it in a pan. The heat is transferred to the food via waves, via heat waves. Write the following for revision notes, please. So for your mini plenary, attached is the questions for food and heat transfers, why food is cooked and heat transfer. Please refer to how to start a sentence, so we're getting more used to writing a sentence rather than just one-word answers. And also take note of the command words. So there you can see explain, and there's another one saying there to explain. Please spend 50 minutes on this task. Should you need help, you can always contact me again via my email or send me a note on Show My Homework. So using the keywords to help with the following questions. So if you wanted to go for the all students, so if you can put the 3 heat transfers in food are, and then give a cooking method for each of those heat transfers. So conduction, convection, radiation, give a cooking method for each of those heat transfers. For most students, radiation is when, so we're focusing on radiation. And what sensory outcomes are produced using this heat transfer. Now remember, there are more than just one way of with radiation, with that cooking method, with that heat transfer. So look out for that with the sensory outcomes. And then some students, when I come to use heat transfers in cooking, I know now that. So you're forwarding your knowledge when it comes to these practical sessions. So you're able to now, or can you demonstrate how well you have taken on board with heat transfers, and how would you use that within cooking? You could talk about a particular recipe that you may have found or may have done, and introduce that and show that how you have been using those heat transfers. Remember using those keywords: conduction, convection, radiation, chemical reactions and vibration. Spend 15 minutes on this task.